Hi everyone, this is my EDL 951 Module 8 case study. To summarize our case, in a rural area, state city dependent school district faces budget challenges and relies on fundraising efforts to support its operations. The district has a small student population and employs 2 teachers per grade level with limited financial resources allocated for computers or software. The district's librarian, Mrs. Lynn, also manages the computer lab and is responsible for coordinating software purchases based on teachers' requests. After some time, teachers approached Mrs. Lynn with the idea of making multiple copies of the newly purchased software programs for classroom use despite copyright restrictions. While some teachers support this idea, Mrs. Brandon expresses concern about copyright violations and informs the superintendent. The superintendent learns about the copied programs and realizes the potential legal consequences. He advises Mrs. Lynn to collect all copies and cease making further copies to avoid copyright infringement penalties. However, Mrs. Lynn argues that the copies help stretch the budget and promote the district's vision of technology usage, unaware of the legal implications. So, taking a further step into this case study and looking at what has happened, the district has a new vision and mission statement to become more innovative and technology based district. Fundraising has supplied 20 computers in order to open a computer lab in the schools. The PTA has also agreed to use funds for the next 3 years to purchase software for the computers in the labs. The software that has been purchased is tied to copyright restrictions. However, the library and media specialist has been copying some of this software so that teachers are able to allow students to use them on the classroom computer and not have to go to the computer lab to do so. A teacher, Mrs. Brandon, who's aware of the consequences of copyright, notified the superintendent, Mr. Sample, of her concerns. When asked about the use of flash drives to copy software, Mrs. Lynn does not know the copyright concerns, and she believes that she is being frugal and working towards the district's vision. When and where this case occurred, it happened in the state city school district, in the school computer lab, and in teachers' classrooms, particularly in the second, third, and fourth grade classrooms. People who are involved or concerned is the superintendent and principal. Mr. Keith Sample is in a dual role of superintendent and principal due to the lack of funds available for the district to support 2 separate roles financially. He's been with the district for 3 years and is working hard to build trust and relationships with the community and the staff. The PTA, they do a lot of fundraising for the school, which the district has to rely on in order to continue to operate in a successful way that's beneficial to the students. The PTA president or director helped Mrs. Lynn copy the software and believes it is also frugal and a great idea. The library or media specialist, which is Mrs. Lynn, she has 2 kids in the school and has no experience or background in these roles, but she volunteers often and has done a lot for the school, such as prioritizing the software needs and organizing the purchased software. And then we also have our teachers, in particular 2 third grade teachers, Mrs. Williams, who is thankful for the copied software, and Mrs. Brandon, who's concerned about the copyright issues. So, looking at what some of our legal and ethical issues are, there's the copyright infringement, also known as piracy, which is using works protected by copyright infringes certain exclusive rights granted to the copyright holder. These rights include reproducing, distributing, displaying, or performing the protected work. Mrs. Lynn believes no one will pay attention to their small community. However, in an article by Krista Love on digital citizenship, it states that every file that you place on the internet has a URL. The information that is posted is available in search engine results, and anyone in the world has access, even those looking for copyright violations. We have broken software licenses. That's a concern. The district has potentially broken those which are legally binding. These licenses define the responsibilities of the parties entering into the license agreement and may impose restrictions on how the software can be used. There's violation of Title 17. All school board employees are expected to follow the provisions of copyright laws currently in force under Title 17 of the United States Code. Any reproduction of copyrighted material shall be done either with permission of the copyright owner or within the bonds of both fair use doctrine of the copyright law and district policy. Otherwise, the individual responsible for such reproduction may be liable for breach of copyright under existing laws. With this policy, employees are informed and provided with the necessary copyright information to help them make informed copyright use decisions. The policy will transfer infringing responsibility to the infringer and not the institution and the personnel within the governing chain of command. Educational use does not mean fair use. Sometimes people mistakenly think that an educational use will be considered a fair use. This is a myth. While the Fair Use Statute codified in Section 107 of the Copyright Act does note that a valid fair use purpose could include teaching, and the first factor notes that one consideration is whether such use is of a commercial nature or is for nonprofit educational purposes. Courts must still apply some different factors to determine whether that particular use is fair or not. We have a potential concern with teacher contracts. A teacher contract binds them to adhering to policy, and so they are at risk of breaking the terms of their teaching contract, which could leave them jobless. We have the PTA director who also volunteers with Mrs. Lynn and believes that copying this information is okay and appropriate. And then we have the ethical issue of the superintendent requesting the removal of software, which could upset the teachers in which those computers are, in which the software is installed on. So let's look at my topic statement. Overall, the school district, faced with a tight budget and a mission to include technology, allow a volunteer media specialist to purchase software that has now made unauthorized copies of the software programs to promote technology usage, unaware of the legal implications. So let's look at some of the facts, or maybe some of the things that we don't know, but maybe would need to know in order to move forward with a plan. So our superintendent is in the dual leadership role as the superintendent and the principal. He's worked really hard to gain credibility, trust, and respect within the community, which a recent survey shows that he has been successful. He's aware there is a violation of copyright, but does he know what the licenses of the software says? The PTA is supportive of the school and helps enormously with the 2 fundraisers that happen a year. The PTA director is supportive of making the software copies, but he's also unaware of the repercussions of this. We have the library and media specialist. She has 2 kids in the district and often volunteers her time. She manages and orders the new software for the district, but is unaware of copyright law and does not see it as a big deal when she's made aware of it. We have our teachers that have begun to trust their superintendent. 2 teachers have had interactions with Mrs. Lynn. Both are 3rd grade teachers. One is a veteran, one is new to the district with experience from another district. And this previous district is where she learned of copyright violations consequences. And then we have our software company to think of. They are currently unaware of the violations of copyright, but they're losing out on money due to the unauthorized sharing of their created and published software. Copyright covers published and unpublished works that are tangible in format, including software. So our places, we have the State City School District. It's a rural district with limited funds. It's 25 minutes away from a large city and has one K through 8 building hosting 420 students. They have 2 teachers per grade level and 2 special education teachers to cover all grade level needs. They bus their high schoolers to the nearby city in order to complete their secondary education. I would want to know if there's a district policy, specifically in State City School District, around the use of copyrights, and does the district conduct an annual training on this or not? We have our computer lab. It's newer to the district and is in place due to the purchase of 20 computers, primarily due to fundraising efforts. We have our teachers' classrooms that seem to have a single computer and are using copied software. The use of this copied software could violate their teaching contract. And we have our programs. We have the purchased software. There are 4 software programs that are being copied and distributed. Is there a license for these software programs? That's something I would want to know. Mrs. Lynn doesn't believe that they will be caught due to them being in a rural community, but people are constantly looking for software piracy. Some statistics on piracy, so that we're aware of how common this is 37% of software on tested machines worldwide is unlicensed. The United States is the leading country with the most confirmed visits of piracy at 12.5 billion visits in 1 year. In 2017, between 230,000 and 560,000 people in the United States lost their jobs due to piracy. Another program to consider is fundraising. It is the primary source of some of these purchases, and so I would want to know if there are any stipulations on the use of these funds in the school district due to it being tied to a fundraiser. So this is a lot of information. Let's review and prioritize this. So what are damages that could occur for stakeholders or the community? Choosing to not adhere to the provisions of copyright laws, the school district could face a lawsuit, which would cost them a substantial amount of money, which they do not have. Who has an important stake in the outcome of the issue? Of course, our students. It would take away funding from their education in order to pay for mistakes that adults are ultimately making. Our teachers are stakeholders. They could lose their jobs if they broke district policy on copyright. Mrs. Lynn, she may lose her position and face the penalties of copyright infringement. Our superintendent, he may lose respect and credibility with the community. The district and the community may face reputational damage. Who are relevant stakeholders? Well, the first relevant stakeholders in any educational situation or decision are, of course, our students. Other relevant stakeholders would be teachers, the library media specialists, the PTA, those who have contributed to fundraisers, those taxpayer dollars, of course, as well, and the superintendent and principal. What else do I need to know? I need to know what the district's policy on copyright is, as well as the terms and the licenses of the software that was purchased. I also need to know if Mrs. Lynn did in fact stop making copies and if she gathered back the flash drives that were distributed. And am I ready to make a decision? I think even with the given information, I am ready to make a decision and can assume some answers on the information that I do not know in order to make the best decision for all stakeholders. All right, so let's look at some of our options and talk about the consequences of those options. So, if I took no action, consequences could be that we are caught violating copyright and we have to pay all of that back. Plus, we would be fined different fees and people could lose their jobs, which would be very difficult to replace, and our reputation as a district would decrease substantially. I could take extensive action. I could go overboard and say, or violating this, so I'm now going to shut down the computer lab and the use of the computers and the use of all the software, but that would completely contradict my mission as the superintendent to include technology more within the district and would not ultimately be setting up those students in that district for success since technology is such a huge part of our world. So some of our intermediate strategies is I could have Mrs. Lynn turn over the flash drives to me, the superintendent. I could uninstall the software on the classroom computers, verify that the computers in the lab are following the software license use. I could review board policy on copyright, plan a staff training on copyright and the consequences of doing so if you follow through with copywriting something. I could plan to have this training annually. Pay for the copied software is another option, and I could, of course, review teacher contracts and take action as appropriate. So now let's look at what some of the pros and cons are to these options. If I have Mrs. Lynn turn the flash drives over, then those would be in my possession, but there is still the copied software within those flash drives, so that would need to be removed. If I uninstall the software on the classroom computers, then it will no longer be in use, but students have less access to the technology. I could verify that the computers in the lab are following software license use. So we would be following those licenses and copyright laws, but we may have to remove additional software from other computers that we weren't aware were violating the licenses outside of just the classroom ones. I could review board policy on copyright. A pro to this would be ensuring compliance and that it's up to date. And a con would be that there's no policy and we might need to update the policy or create one, which can be very time intensive. I could plan a staff training on copyright and have this annually. Albuquerque Public Schools do this. They say copyright violation is the use of the work of another without permission. It is the responsibility of each school principal to schedule an annual review of the copyright policy and regulation at a school staff meeting. It is the responsibility of each teacher or librarian to keep school staff informed of the use of copyrighted materials, to maintain appropriate records of permissions, agreements, licenses, and registrations, and to place appropriate copyright warning notices on or near copying equipment. A pro to having this annual training would be that staff are well informed and they would have no excuses of saying that they didn't know. A con is that the time to take this may take away from other professional development opportunities. I could pay for the copied software. They might continue. So a pro would be that students and teachers could continue to use this and learn from it. But a con is that it could cost us a lot of money that the district just doesn't have. And I could review our teacher contracts and take action as appropriate. I would be ethically responsible in doing this, but I may lose valuable staff members that are very difficult to replace in our rural community. So keeping all of this in mind, the decision that I would make would be to have Miss Lynn turn over the flash drives, uninstall the software on classroom computers, verify that the computers in the lab are following the software license use. I would review board policy on copyright, plan a staff training, have it annually, and review teacher contracts and inform them as appropriate. The decision will be implemented in knowing that multiple staff members were unaware of the penalties that come from copyright. So I would want to be respectful of that and treat them and the situation with respect. I would not terminate any teachers for a violation of their contract at this point in time, but I would let them know that they are now aware and I'm documenting the conversation. So any further actions could result in an immediate termination. I would still work to fulfill the new vision and mission of the district, and so I would not eliminate the software altogether, but rather teach our students and staff that part of being able to use technology is also being a responsible digital citizen. So ways that I would implement this plan is I would first First, have Mrs. Lynn turn over the flash drives with the copied software, and then I will have the installed software removed from classroom computers. From there, I'll check the software license on all 4 products that were purchased. I will verify appropriate use of those licenses in the computer lab and take action as needed. I will work to inform staff as soon as possible about copyright through the use of a newly developed training. I will implement this training with staff on an annual basis. Next, I'll review teacher contracts and inform them as appropriate for those who have violated it. Then I will review the Board of Education policy on copyright and communicate suggested changes to the board and bring it to their attention in order for them to take action as needed. And finally, I will evaluate the changes and the situation and accumulate data over time in order to appropriately adjust as needed. Some of the outcomes of this decision may be that the PTA believes the superintendent is not being resourceful with the funds. This could be brought to the Board of Education's attention, and I would need to be able to articulate and explain the situation, the legalities behind it, and the potential of higher costs if we would land ourselves as a district in a lawsuit. Another consequence is that we may have upset staff members due to taking away the software from classroom computers, but I do believe that if the consequences to face are those of staff being upset, then I would be able to deal with that on my own. And finally, our standard correlation, correlated with our standards for this assignment in multiple ways. I was able to make decisions around the use of technology and some of the legalities tied to it. As a leader, I was able to make informed and data-driven decisions so that I could implement next steps and make sound decisions. It was relevant because everyday decisions have to be made by leaders that ultimately impact multiple areas of a district or a community. And it allowed me to process through a step-by-step decision based on a situation that really could happen. This assignment has impacted me as a district leader in 2 different ways. One is that I realize copyright is something that happens a lot more than we're aware of. So, familiarizing myself with or consulting with our technology department on the software we have and what the licenses are tied to them and what those licenses dictate or allow. And then also, I'll ensure that I myself am not unknowingly in violation of any copyrights by determining the kinds of softwares that I currently use and that I have a license for it and that the license allows me for my use. So here are the references that I used throughout this presentation, and I thank you all for listening, and that concludes my case study. Thank you.